Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm your host, Amanda Lamb. It's a family classic, A Christmas Carol. It's in its 50th year in the Triangle, with performances both in Raleigh and Durham. But the truly amazing thing this year is that the star, Ira David Wood III, who has played Scrooge in the magical show since he was 27, well, this is his last year. WRAL photographer and actor Mark Olexik joins us to talk about this milestone. Mark, welcome to the program.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Amanda.
So for people who don't know, I mean, you have to be living under a rock, right? But if you don't know, what is the history of this show in our area?
So back in the mid-'70s at Theater in the Park, a small community theater off Pullen Road near NC State, a gentleman by the name of Ira David Wood III one summer said, we need to have a Christmas program. And let's do something with A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, but let's do it a little differently. So with the aid of some friends, he got a unique musical comedy adaptation of it up and running in that theater space, which only holds a few hundred people. But it was such a booming, fast success that they were selling seat cushions off of lobby sofas. And a few years after that, they moved down to downtown Raleigh Memorial Auditorium, which seats about 2,200 people, and it just kind of went from there. And I'm probably getting ahead of myself already.
No, that's great. And they're also now at DPAC, right? So they do both Raleigh and Durham.
Yes, DPAC opened in 2008, and Ira David Wood III's A Christmas Carol was actually the first musical ever performed at the Durham Performing Arts Center. I believe the first official act at the DPAC was B.B. King, but a few months after B.B. King showed up, their first musical was David Wood's A Christmas Carol.
Oh, that's fantastic. So I know I introduced you. Your day job is a photographer, but you're also an actor. That's what I put in the introduction because I know that about you. So tell me how long you were involved in the show and what was your role?
I was in the show every year from 2009 through 2015. And depending on what year you saw the show in that time frame, I was all over the place. I was a few different spots in the ensemble. I was Nephew Fred a few times, and I was a chimney sweep. So I moved around a decent bit.
And you had to do that. I mean, you were always working a day job, right? So you must just be passionate about theater, acting, singing, to be able to do that in your off time.
I'm very passionate about it, and I am particularly passionate about that particular show. It was, apart from my older sister's dance recitals when I was a child, it was my first introduction of what theater could be, and to get into it for the first time as an adult was just a constant out-of-body experience. So I, like many people who do that show and other community theater shows, are willing to make sacrifices to make it happen.
Absolutely. Well, we will be right back after the break. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. So, $1 million question. Tell us about Ira David Wood III. What is he like, and what do you think it's like for him to do this show for the very last time after 50 years?
I feel like there are several ways to answer that question. He's a very nice person, first off. But as is the case with any director of any show, he can be very imposing or intimidating when he needs to be. And as he should. This show has been his bread and butter since he was in his late 20s. But he definitely facilitates a family atmosphere every year he does the show. There are people who've done the show for decades. I know David Henderson, who plays Jacob Marley, has done so for about 25 years. Same goes for David Moore, who plays Bob Cratchit. It's actually David Moore's last year in the show, too. And as a child, I adored Ira David Wood III from afar as this borderline, mythical Christmas man who
absolutely
would, come around every December and make people laugh and cry in the good way every December.
And then you get to work with him.
And then I got to work with him, and it's still just kind of a shock. Every time I look at him, there's still that 7-year-old version of myself that's just like, it's Ira David Wood III. Oh my gosh, it's
And then you were
Scrooge.
on
So
stage with them. That is so cool. I love hearing
yeah,
stories from actors like that about, their younger selves. And then when they finally get to meet the person, what that is like. I mean, how far in advance do you start working on this show? I'm just curious.
that depends on the year. The last several years, the show has started rehearsals in mid to late September or even early October. But my first year in the show, an abbreviated cast, will say, went to France and performed a concert version of the show over Thanksgiving. So that year, they had a
Started
round of
earlier
they had a round of auditions in June that year, to kind of
to
get
be
that cast
prepared. Yeah.
solidified. But then they had another round of auditions the following September to flesh out the Raleigh production, which was much bigger, had a lot more people. So yeah, it generally starts in you know late summer, early fall, but generally depending on the year.
So, what is this like for him being his last year?
I interviewed him a few days ago with one of our producers, Heather Lee, and he was very, I guess, reverent might be a word. Of course, it
Sure.
was also about 30 minutes before the show, so he was probably trying to conserve some energy. But you could tell that just 50 years of happiness and love were just flooding to the forefront of everything he was telling us. And I remember we asked him, what would you say to the generations of people who have buoyed this show for the last 50 years? And he just said thank you about half a dozen times.
Yeah, I mean, this is
and
just got to be really emotional for him. And I know his son is going to take over. How do you think that'll make the show different?
What's interesting is Ira, his son, definitely adds his own flair in certain parts. But I think, at least for now, Ira is going to try to honor what his dad did with the role. And with time, as the years go by, he may adapt it into his own thing, but still keeping the spirit of what his father did for so many decades.
Absolutely. And, finally, what do you think it is about this show that has made it such a family tradition and has had such an impact on people in our area?
I think this show is just such a rare gem. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of productions of A Christmas Carol across the world, but there is something about this particular show that just hits certain sweet spots. It is funny when it can be, but it honors those tender moments of the original Charles Dickens story that need to remain tender moments. And I think a lot of people around the holidays need a mixture of that. They need to be brought down to a level where they just feel at peace, but also know that it's okay to laugh at themselves every so often.
That's a
So,
great way of putting it. Yeah. And it's a
and
tough time of the year for people, for a lot of people.
of course it is. It really is. And there are people who do the show every so often who do it, because they may be having some kind of issues in their own lives, whether it's at work or at home. But going to rehearsals for A Christmas Carol is a place where they can go and get a hug from their fellow
It's a safe
castmates.
space. Yeah.
It's a safe space. Everyone needs some variation of a safe space. And on a personal note, I remember when that curtain opened in 2009, my first year in the show, it felt like I was reaching across Memorial Auditorium to the back of the venue where I sat as a 7-year-old, and I was able to give that 7-year-old version of me a big hug and say, we did it. We're here. And doesn't this feel indescribably incredible? So for people like me who grow up loving the show and then do the 180 and become a part of it in some capacity, it is just wild. But even for the people who just make it a tradition to see every year or every few years, it's just such a gem that people bring their hopes into and walk out with so much more.
Wow. You just gave me chills. Okay. Thank you for that. And it runs through the 17th. Am I correct at DPAC?
Correct. The final show is at 2 p.m. Sunday, December 17th at the Durham Performing Arts Center.
Awesome. So you still have time to catch it. Mark, thank you so much for giving such insight and depth into this show that maybe a lot of people didn't know the history, and now maybe they'll go check it out. So really appreciate your time today. And you can find more podcasts from WRAL News at WRAL.com. Search podcasts. From sports to my true crime shows, there are plenty of shows to keep you informed and keep you entertained. And as always, thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download.